guys, it's Nicole. I'm back with another video, and today I would like to talk about a little bit of the history of American, specifically US, musical theater, and just kind of theater in general. In case anyone doesn't know, I actually majored in musical theater when I went to college, so I do have a little bit of credentials to talk about this, but I did do a little bit of internet searching just to keep my brain focused on it, because I did graduate a couple years ago, so it's not exactly fresh on my mind, but it is something I did go to school for. And part of my channel involves a little bit of musicals, a little bit of theater, a lot of bit of, because I kind of like to do a variety here. It's not just books, it's not just talking about pop culture, it's a little bit about theater too. And I hope some of you guys will be interested in a little bit of this. I'm not going to go deep into this. This is just a little bit of history. But I think one of the most interesting things I learned when I was in school is the origins of musical theater in the US. Because it's different, obviously, all over the world. There's theater and musical theater all over the place in the world, and every history is different, clearly. This is going to be about US musical theater and theater in general. So it's interesting and I think important to know that the origins of musical theater in the US begin with minstrel shows. Now, obviously, music and performing were not like started with that kind of thing. I mean, obviously there's been performers of all kinds, I think, through all of history, in all cultures. But when we're talking about the kind of musical theater we know today in America, that's what we're talking about. So minstrel shows, they began in the 1840s. That's kind of when they were most popular. I think there was a little bit before then. But when they were first well known, when they were first developed, it was the 1840s. And I have a couple articles here that kind of verify those years and times that I will obviously link in the description. But so it was the 1840s. And then actually the minstrel shows peaked after the Civil War and then still were popular into the early 1900s. I'm not going to go into this right now, but they kind of stopped and they started doing more like longer shows and productions after that. And then everything completely changed when the musical Showboat premiered on Broadway, which I believe was in 1927. 1927, when Showboat premiered on Broadway, was the very first of the kind of musical we're used to today, which is called a storybook musical. Storybook musicals, I'm not going to go into it like crazy because this is a video about minstrel shows, but storybook musicals are what we know today, like Wicked, like really any of the other musicals that you've heard of, Hairspray, any of them, any of the musicals that, and here's the definition of what a storybook musical is. It's a musical play, so it's a musical, where the songs and dances are integrated into a story with a serious dramatic goal. So before Showboat, like in the minstrel shows, like in some other musicals before Showboat, the songs were present, but they did not carry the plot. They were not integrated into the story. So Showboat was the beginning of that. But that's another video I can talk about another time. It's another thing I can talk about in another video, another time, if anyone's interested. But what I wanted to talk about was how minstrel shows were the beginning of what we know as musical theater today. So, like I said, they remained popular into the early 1900s. And the reason I wanted to bring this up was because I think there's a lot of people that don't really recognize just how recent some things in our history are. Minstrel shows were known for the actors and performers appearing in blackface. This is true. This is 100% true. You can look it up yourself. You can look at the links that I post below. The performers in the minstrel shows would be most of the time doing blackface. And in doing this, they were portraying characters that they created that were Black. And so they did blackface to portray these characters. And of course, they were making these characters out to be stereotypes. Typically negative stereotypes, especially if we're talking about the US in the 1840s to the early 1900s. Yeah, so not exactly positive stereotypes, which I don't think there's any positive stereotypes, but that's a whole other thing. So it's problematic, of course. Minstrel shows, and if you ever encounter someone who knows anything about musical theater or anything like that, and you mention minstrel shows to them, they'll go, yeah, that's an unfortunate part of the history. But it is true, and it's part of the history, and I think it's important to talk about. I think it's important to know about, because it's not something we just want to sweep under the rug. It's not okay now, wasn't okay then, but it was accepted then. Back then, it was accepted for people to do blackface, especially performers, when they were putting on a character that happened to be Black. And obviously, not okay. But it's not okay today, not okay then. And I just think it's interesting to talk about because, you know, musical theater became such a big cultural aspect of you know, American life, especially, I kind of even want to say just even in the 1920s and 30s, like when it started and it just kind of grew, like it just kind of became popular. I mean, everyone knows what Broadway is. Everyone. That's a cultural phenomenon even in itself. To know a street. It's a street. It's a literal street with theaters on it. To know this street where it's so widely known across the entire country, it's a cultural phenomenon. It is. So musical theater, whether you're into it or not, has an impact on our culture and our society. And that's why I think it's important to know the origins and to talk about why there's a lot of problematic aspects of the origin. In this specific site, this is a site I found that talks about minstrel shows. It says, in these shows, white men blackened their faces with burnt cork, which I saw that in multiple sources, so I think that's true, to lampoon Black people, performing songs and skits that sentimentalize the nightmare of slave life on Southern plantations. Blacks were shown as naive buffoons who sang and danced the days away, gobbling, I don't know how to say that, stealing the occasional watermelon and expressing their inexplicable love for, oh, that's got to be master, but they were making fun of the way that they would say it, I guess. Again, you can read it. I will attach this article to the video in the description. But as you can see, that's my dog barking. As I said, they created these characters with stereotypes, negative stereotypes, obviously. And it was to mock them. They even, it says here, they were shown as naive buffoons. And here's why I said it's not as far in our past as people may think. Because I think a lot of people tend to, and this is not necessarily on purpose, maybe it just feels far away because it hasn't happened in our lifetimes. But I think people tend to forget just how recent things were. So I have another site pulled up here. It's from the New York Theater. It's an article called Blackface on Stage. And the reason I say it's not as far in the past as you think is because there is a picture on this website of Judy Garland, and I'm pretty sure everybody knows who Judy Garland is, whether we saw her in things when she was alive or not. We know who Judy Garland is. We know how recent in our history she was. There is a picture of her on this site of her in blackface. So that's my point. She was in musicals too. She did stage work too. She did that kind of stuff too. She did blackface. This specific picture was from a movie. It says that is from the 1938 movie musical Everybody Sing. But the point is, it's very recent in our history. And it's even the origins of musical theater that we know today. Now, does this mean that musical theater in and of itself is a problematic cultural phenomenon? Personally, I'm going to say no, because while the origins started in something negative and something really mean, because really just horrible and mean, let's dress up like a certain people that we've oppressed so that we can make fun of them. Like, talk about mean girl energy. But I think that the way it evolved, because it wasn't just white performers. I have somewhere here that it wasn't just white performers, but even black performers would still put the burnt cork on their face to do blackface even though they were black. And so it was almost like part of the performance. Not to say that that was okay and that they should have made them do that or whatever, but it's something that was common even with black performers. And what it did do was that it did eventually lead to a more inclusive art where, you know, anyone that was black could actually just play a character. They didn't have to do blackface. White people didn't do blackface anymore because eventually it started to become a little bit more taboo, but it still was more recent than I think most people think. But I think that's kind of why maybe it's not as problematic, musical theater today, what we know it as. Because if you know anything about musical theater, you know for a fact that there's many black actors that have originated roles on Broadway, that continue to play the roles in tours and everything. And now we have all different kinds of people from all over the world playing those roles and even having characters that they play that are from their culture. And so we've moved in a better direction. So I don't think that the institution of musical theater itself is problematic because we have evolved. Now, it still means that the origins are problematic. It was not okay that this was happening, and I'm very glad that it's changed. Not a good thing to be doing blackface, to be making fun of anyone for anything, especially their race and the circumstances that perhaps your own people put them in. And I'm glad that it's over. But I think it's important to acknowledge the problematic origins of musical theater. You don't want to ignore or sweep history under the rug. As much as I love musical theater today, learning this, I learned it in college. I didn't know this beforehand. I've been doing musical theater since I was 8 years old. I didn't know this until then. And learning this, it didn't make me feel negative towards musical theater. It made me feel angry that that's the origins. It definitely didn't surprise me because I know how people behaved back in the 1840s to the early 1900s. I know. But it definitely made me realize there's no infallible piece of culture. There's always going to be something in it that's problematic. But I think what's important is that it's part of culture, and so culture needs to evolve. And because of how big of a part it is in our society and in the US and society, I think it was even more important for this art form to evolve, because once the art starts to evolve, then society starts to evolve, and vice versa. It's like that whole saying, art imitating life, life imitating art. Art is a representation of the current situation, of the current culture, and it was incredibly important for it to change. But it is important to acknowledge that that's how it started. So there's another part here that I'm also going to mention, because I think it's just interesting, because it's in the article, so when I link it, you can look it up for yourself. But, and I remember learning this in college, but again, I can't remember everything for the rest of my life, so I have to refresh my memory. There it is. That's the word I was looking for. But if you live in the US and you know a good amount about US history, you have heard of Jim Crow laws. Now, these are laws that really oppressed people back then. I want to say it was pre-1960s, I believe. It really oppressed Black people. There's certain laws, you can look it up if you're interested, but the point is, we call them Jim Crow laws. And I don't know if anyone's ever wondered where that term came from, but it actually comes from musical theater. So, and again, this says it in the article, but it comes from the song called Jump Jim Crow. And I'm not going to read the lyrics because they're written in a way that is derogatory towards the way Black people talked back then. So you can go on and read it yourself. But it's a song from the 1820s. And here it even says that a white performer called Thomas Rice, never heard of him, he donned blackface using burnt cork and performed Jump Jim Crow. And according to this site, it says that he first heard it from an old Black street singer who supposedly made up the lyric about his own name. So obviously here it says it became like more than a popular song. And then by the 1880s, that's when Jim Crow had become synonymous with a complex system of racial laws and customs in the South that enabled, as it says here, white social, legal, and political domination of Blacks. So you can look up specifically what the Jim Crow laws were if you don't know them, but that's what they did. It's true. But that's why I think it's important to learn this kind of stuff, right? Because even something that all of us know that is a very bad thing, Jim Crow laws, came from minstrel shows, the origins of musical theater. That's how much of an impact that musical theater has had and still has on American society. It just has this ginormous impact. And I want to continue to talk about it. I think people need to know about this stuff. I think it's important to learn history as accurately as we can. And that's what I hope to do. And I hope to make more videos like this. So I hope you enjoyed this. This is the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. I will absolutely link these articles and you can go on and do your own research. I always like to look at a couple of sources because, you know, confirming things and whatever. But I really appreciate you watching. I hope you enjoyed this because even though this was a little bit of a darker topic than most of my videos tend to be, I still enjoy it. I still enjoy talking about something that is important to me. And talking about history as accurately as we can is very important to me. So if you watched all the way to the end, I really appreciate you. You have no idea. And I can't wait to make more videos like this. I will absolutely be doing that if this gets a little bit more views, or maybe I just will just for my own enjoyment. But if you like this video, like it and subscribe to my channel. I'll be posting videos once a week. It's been happening on Friday mornings lately. I'm not going to say that it's going to stay that way, but it has been that way, so maybe it'll stay that way. But yeah, comment what you think, and thank you so much for watching.